security and compliance go hand in hand. And from a marketing perspective, one of the beauties of compliance as a service, it is something that should be done on a recurring basis. And most MSPs are already used to billing on a recurring monthly revenue basis. So it's a fantastic additional service to add to your stack.
Paul Green's MSP Marketing Podcast.
Extended interview.
Just to set some context, this interview with Max was recorded back in February, a few weeks before Kaseya announced the acquisition of Datto.
Hey everyone, I'm Max Pruger. I am the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Compliance Manager at Kaseya.
And thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, Max. Now, we're going to talk today about a new potential revenue opportunity for MSPs, which is always a good subject to have on the podcast. Before we talk about that, let's just position your authority and talk about why you know the things that you're about to talk about. So give us an idea of your background. How long have you been in technology? Where have you come from? And a little bit more about what you're doing now.
Thanks, Paul. And first of all, I do really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. So I'll give you the quick Reader's Digest version. My background is IT. I graduated with a degree in computer science, but I haven't slung code in about 20 years. So my MSP background goes to around 1999. I started an MSP way back then. We didn't even know what an MSP was. We called ourselves an ASP, but it was the same general principle. And then I did that for a couple of years. And then I joined Kaseya as actually one of the very first employees. So I think I was employee 21, 22. And back then I was trying to convince IT companies to stop doing break fix, block hours, and convert to recurring monthly revenue services contracts. So I really saw the early adopter phase of the RMM and PSA and backup and a bunch of other tools. I took a 4-year hiatus and I left Kaseya and I started a separate software company in the MSP space. And we did really well. We grew to about 3,000 servers worldwide. And then that company was eventually acquired by a Fortune 50 company, I think 2 years ago. But right before that, I had the opportunity to come back to Kaseya after the Rapid Fire Tools acquisition and run the Compliance Manager business unit. So I jumped on board that. I returned to Kaseya about 2.5 years ago. I've been running this business unit along with a couple of others ever since. And I will say, as of last year, this was the fastest growing business unit of all the family of companies that Kaseya has.
Oh, you had to get that one in. That was a good plug for yourself on that one. There's some really fascinating things you just mentioned there, which I'm going to pick up with you on our YouTube channel. So we'll be doing an extended version of this interview. And I'll tell you just before we finish the podcast interview the things that I want to talk to you about. But specifically today on the podcast, I want to talk about compliance. And I, as you know, Max, because I know that you're a listener to the podcast, I'm not a technical person. And when you say a word to me, something like compliance, that means, I think that can mean different things to different people. So just so we're all coming at this from, if you like, the same attack angle, describe to me, what do you mean by compliance?
Yeah, so that's actually a perfect question because I used to have this really long legal definition of what compliance meant. And I came across a really short one. And so in my opinion, my definition of compliance is you're literally just following the rules and guidelines set by a third party. And that third party can be a government agency, it could be a vendor, it could be a cyber insurance company, it could be an industry standard, but that's pretty much it. Somebody else sets those requirements and you're just following those requirements based off of the guidelines that they've set up.
Okay, so that's a really, really easy way to understand it. So for an MSP, if they have clients who are regulated, any compliance products or services that they use is just them helping their regulated clients comply with the laws and the rules that they have to follow.
Precisely. And in a regulated industry, it's very, very easy. So I know that, again, your podcast reaches all over the world, but in the US, we have HIPAA, which is our healthcare law. And it's just a lot of what they call requirements, and you have to meet those requirements. So, pretty much every compliance standard has a password management requirement. And so you have to have some sort of policy and procedure associated with that password management requirement. So there's a tremendous amount of overlap in the space. But at the end of the day, like I said, one of the nice things about compliance is that you're not reinventing the wheel. You're just following the guidelines and rules set by a third party.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Now, you said we're quite early days in compliance, and certainly compliance as a service. So obviously the requirements of compliance have been there for, decades and decades and decades. What's changed over the last few years to create the opportunity for MSPs?
So the big impetus on that was really you guys, so UK and the EU with GDPR. So as you said, compliance has been around for a really long time. I mentioned HIPAA. It's been around for, I think, 1995, 1996. It was optional, so people ignored it. But at the end of the day, there's lots of compliance standards out there. But for the most part, from an international perspective, the EU really led the way with GDPR. Since then, if you look at the rest of the world, South Africa passed PAPIA, China has their own compliance standard, LGPD, I believe, is the one for Brazil. And in the US, we like to do things a little bit different, so we don't have a national standard yet. It is coming. It's coming sooner than most people think, but what's happened in the US is that the states have started passing their own laws. So in the US, we have California, and they really use the guidelines from GDPR to come out with their standard. Virginia passed theirs, and New York passed New York Shield, and Texas. And what a lot of people don't realize is that every single state in the United States has a breach notification law in the books. So whether you are aware of it or not, if a company has a breach, then there are certain requirements that they have to follow to notify specific authorities and their employees and users and things like that. So at the end of the day, it's really accelerated, and it is going to continue to accelerate. And the big thing that I'm seeing is that it's not government agencies. While you hear about them and GDPR and again CCPA and so on, what's really going to drive compliance to the SMB space is cyber insurance companies and larger vendors. So there is a huge shift happening this year with cyber insurance. It's getting much more difficult to get. The costs are going up and the payouts are going down, and self-attestations, so those forms that you filled out once a year and you check your boxes and you claim you're doing things, those are going away, and you're actually going to have to provide evidence of compliance that you are following the terms and conditions in those policies, and you're going to have to do that more than once a year. So you're going to have to maintain that compliance. So that's number one. And then number two, what I'm really seeing a lot of is vendors. So if you want to sell something on Amazon, I just talked to an MSP, they've got a customer that's a Hyatt franchise. They have to fill out Hyatt franchise's vendor management agreement. So if you want to sell GM, if you want, again, any manufacturing industry, so those larger organizations are saying to their downline that they must follow those compliance requirements. And then not only do they follow those, but then it flows down to their vendors as well. So vendor management is going to be a big compliance requirement as well.
And so I guess these ordinary companies that are suddenly being hit with this requirement to comply to some obscure law that they didn't even know was in place, are they just then picking up the phone to their IT guys and saying, hey, can you guys help me with this?
Literally, I had a call about 30 minutes ago with that exact conversation. An MSP calls me up, and he's the one who told me about the Hyatt situation and said, I support a Hyatt franchise, and they just got this vendor management agreement, and they want me to fill it out in 30 minutes. I said, that's not reality. You can do a baseline. You can do a quick gap analysis of their situation, but I like to say compliance is a journey. It is not a destination. You are never done with compliance. It is a process, and you've got to start that process. The best time to start it was yesterday, but if you didn't do it yesterday, the next best time is to start it today, and then maintain that compliance over time.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Now, obviously, you have one of the divisions that you run is compliance manager, and we will talk about that towards the end of the interview. Let's talk about compliance as a service and how you would set that up as a revenue stream. So what do you see as the big challenges for an MSP getting into this and doing this properly?
So the number one challenge, as with any early adopter type of product, it's not the software. Most MSPs know how to install software. They can run scans, they can answer technical questions, and so on. It's really around the marketing side, the sales side. How do I position, price, sell, deliver compliance as a service? So that's where the majority of folks struggle. And that's where, again, most MSPs need assistance.
So what would your recommendations be? You're clearly talking to lots of MSPs about this. Is in terms of selling it and marketing it, is it simply about the classic marketing thing of putting yourself in the mind of the person who's buying it? Or is it about understanding the laws? Or is it just a case of saying, hey, you can relax, we've got the tools to handle this, just leave it with us. What's the best approach?
It really depends on the maturity of the MSP. For those more mature MSPs, they may already be doing compliance type services. Security and compliance go hand in hand, and security is actually delivering your IT services in a secure manner. Compliance is just proving that through the appropriate evidence of compliance documentation. So again, from a marketing perspective, one of the beauties of compliance as a service, because I mentioned it's a journey, not a destination, it is something that should be done on a recurring basis. And most MSPs are already used to billing on a recurring monthly revenue basis. So it's a fantastic additional service to add to your stack. Again, if an MSP is not familiar with compliance, not to push our product, but we do provide a lot of assistance and training and education and support and so on. We like to say you don't have to be an expert. It can take 25 years to be an expert in compliance, but we can make you an authority relatively quickly. And at the end of the day, you may not even be capable of doing a full assessment or certification, and that's fine. But what you can do is you can help your end customers get ready for a third-party assessment. You can identify those gaps, and then you can put together a plan of action and milestones to start addressing the gaps that they have in order to meet some particular compliance requirement.
How big a market do you think this is going to become, Max, in terms of, clearly, as you say, that there are lots of, different states are bringing in different regulations. The UK and the EU led it with GDPR. I think we can all agree that there's going to be more legislation coming in the years and decades ahead. Do you see this becoming a bigger and bigger thing, or do you think there's going to be a finite pot to this?
Every single company in the world is going to have some sort of compliance requirement that they're going to have to adhere to. And like I said, there's government requirements, and then it's going to be the cyber insurance companies and the vendors and their vendor relationships that are going to force compliance down to the SMB and MME level. And we've already seen this in the United States. We had Enron. If you're not familiar, hopefully everybody's familiar with Enron. But during the dot-com bubble, you had Enron. And then when they collapsed, what ended up happening was that the US passed a whole bunch of laws, and everything starts at the enterprise level, and then it starts flowing its way down. So that's why you see these massive enterprise GRC type of platforms, and they cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And again, enterprise organizations all have a compliance officer or governance officer. They're doing risk management. And so again, at the end of the day, whether it happens this year or next year or in a couple of years, that's going to flow down, because we're already seeing that, to the mid-market and eventually down to the SMB space. And you're not going to have a choice. MSPs are going to have to deliver their IT services leveraging some sort of industry best practice, whether that's NIST DSF or ISO 27001 or CIS controls, whatever it is. They're going to have to prove that they're delivering their IT services using some compliance requirement.
Final question then. Tell us a little bit about Compliance Manager. What is it? How does it help? And what's the best way to get in touch with your team about Compliance Manager?
We're actually, it's an opportune moment right now. We're really, really excited. So we are releasing the next generation of Compliance Manager, GRC. And so the initial version was a data auditing and validation platform with a report generation engine. And effectively what that means is that there's lots and lots of checklist products out there. Everybody knows what the right answers are. They check all their boxes and so on. But part of the challenge and part of my language here is that it's garbage in, garbage out. If you put all the right answers, you're going to get a great looking evidence of compliance documentation. But when the auditors come in, they want to actually validate that what you put in your documentation matches what's on your environment. And a large portion of the time, those things don't match. So that's the number one enforced violation pretty much across all of the different compliance auditors. So what we've done with Compliance Manager is that we also ask all of the same questions, but we've coupled that with software scans and audits that automatically audit an environment, making the MSPs much more efficient, because there's a lot of manual labor in that process, and we get rid of a lot of that manual labor and automate it. And then we map it to a step-by-step task list. So you don't have to be a compliance expert. You don't have to be an expert in HIPAA or GDPR. You literally follow those tasks. As you complete the task, you're getting closer and closer to adhering to those compliance guidelines. When you're done, then we do generate the required evidence of compliance documentation, and we back it up with the automated scans to prove that what you say you have is actually what you have. And with the new release of Compliance Manager GRC, we've really expanded that out. We've made it extremely extensible. So we ship with a lot of compliance standards in the product, but you can go and create your own. Again, yesterday I was talking to one of our existing customers, and he literally built the 160 plus controls for CIS V8 over the weekend once we launched the product. And then, of course, finally, we are adding additional features. So things like employee tracking and training and management, vendor management, and so on into the product. So that's kind of my 50,000 foot view of the new Compliance Manager GRC platform.
And where's the best place to go to get some information and have a chat to someone about this?
So obviously you can contact any one of your Kaseya family of company sales reps. So if you have any one of the Kaseya company products, whether it's VSA or BMS or IT Glue or Rapfire Tools or ID Agent, and there's so many of them right now, you're welcome to reach out to them, and then they'll be happy to schedule a follow-up call, a webinar, a demo. You can go to kaseya.com and click on products and hit Compliance Manager. And then we will be rolling out a brand new website called Compliance Manager GRC in the next couple of weeks.
Brilliant, Max. Thank you so much for being here on the podcast. Now, you and I are going to continue our interview. It's an extended interview over on YouTube, and we've got lots of things to talk about. I want to talk to you about cyber insurance. So you said earlier that it's getting harder to buy cyber insurance, and yet what I'm seeing from the MSPs that I talk to is that more people are asking to buy it. So we're going to have a look, we'll explore how those two things are going to come together and clash in some way. Also, you've worked for Kaseya twice. You worked there, I think you said you were employee number 21 back in the day. And I imagine you're employee 2021 today. So I want to just explore what it was like in Kaseya back then compared to what it's like now, and what it's actually like to work within a very acquisitive, big vendor such as that. I think we'll also have a little bit of a look at the early adopter phase as well. So you've been through, you've been around. I think you were saying earlier, since sort of break fix days. In fact, you were running. You called it an ASP earlier. What does ASP stand for?
So we were what we call ourselves was an application service provider, but the theory was exactly the same. So it was a recurring monthly revenue contract where you effectively outsourced your IT department to us. So again, that was very, very early on. And our theory was it's just like electricity, you plug it in and it should work. So IT should work exactly the same way. But yeah, we call ourselves an ASP instead of an MSP.
I love that. So, but essentially you had exactly the same model. So we're going to explore that a little bit more as well. You have had a great career. You really have. I say that as if it's over, but you don't actually look old enough to have been going this long and to have done these many interesting things. Let's pick up about cyber insurance. So as I was just saying there seems to be, I can see a clash coming up where more and more end clients are talking to their MSPs about cyber insurance. They're seeing big hacks coming into the news. They're starting to feel a little bit exposed, and they want to just remove that risk. And as you say, the cyber insurance companies are starting to crack down, and essentially, of course, they're trying to minimize their risks because that's what insurance companies do. How do you think that's going to play out over the next couple of years?
So it'll be interesting. I just did a panel discussion, I think about a week or two ago, with a CEO of a cyber insurance brokerage firm. And so we were talking about the changes that are going on in the cyber insurance industry. And to your point, the whole point of insurance is to try to mitigate risk. And one of the challenges that a lot of these underwriters have is that, relatively speaking, in the insurance world, cyber insurance is a very, very new product. So they're still trying to figure out how to price that risk. Mm-hmm. And because of all of the cyber criminal activity and the hackers and the crypto lockers and all the other stuff that's out there, what they discovered is that they've significantly underpriced the risk. And nothing against insurance companies, but we all know insurance companies are in the business to collect premiums, not to pay out claims. So they're going to do whatever they can, legally speaking, within their contract to try to minimize those payouts as much as possible. So what we are seeing now, so this is happening today, is that coverages are coming down and premiums are going up. So you're getting less coverage for a higher price. And again, I'm not blaming the insurance companies. All insurance companies do is take premiums on one side, make payouts on the other side, and try to keep a very small portion for themselves so that they can obviously stay in business and so on. And when the payouts exceed the premiums, then they have to adjust.
This isn't a bad thing, though, because the way I see it is if the insurance, as you say, if the coverage is coming down and the premiums are going up, they're going to start to insist on having some basic things in place. So if you talk to, and you and I both talk to MSPs all the time, you're probably having more cybersecurity conversations with them. But how often does an MSP have a client where they will make a very specific recommendation, even something as simple as using MFA universally across all of their applications, and the client will reject it. They just don't want to do it. I think if the price of their cyber insurance is that much higher because they won't use MFA, that to me is a good thing, because there is a financial penalty on that end client for not being compliant with what we would all say is basic security practice these days.
Precisely. And again, I would just push back a little bit and say it's not coming. It's already here. So
Okay.
Every cyber insurance policy has terms and conditions. It's usually referred to as due care, which is typically based off of the NIST cybersecurity framework. But if you look at those cyber insurance policies, they say you must meet these terms and conditions. And as I said before, you can check the box and put whatever you want there. But if you have a breach, no cyber insurance company is going to call you and say, hey, could you please tell me if you're using two-factor authentication? They're going to say, send me evidence, send me proof, and you've got to be able to prove it. And the big thing, one of the big things that was mentioned in my call from last week was that one of the things that they're also starting to put into the cyber insurance policies is limitations of liability based off of the inability to prove that you've done what you've said you've done, or a delay. So for example, there's a cyber insurance policy out there that says if you don't patch within 60 days, we will automatically lower the payout, maximum payout, by 75% or to 75% or 50% and so on. And that doesn't mean you're going to get 75%. That means that they've lowered the payout to at most 75%. And then you got to prove other things. The other interesting statistic, and I haven't validated this, so you can take it for what it's worth, but it was mentioned that 42% of companies, and this is according to the CEO of a large cyber insurance underwriter, 42% of companies won't even qualify for cyber insurance this year. And last year, roughly 49% of cyber insurance claims did not get paid out fully. So that doesn't mean they didn't get paid out at all, but 49 is pretty close to 50. So roughly 1 out of every 2 claims did not get a full payout because they were not able to meet the requirements set in those cyber insurance policies.
Wow, that's astonishing, isn't it? That's something that we're certainly going to see develop over the next couple of years. Let's talk about your career with Kaseya then. So when did you first join Kaseya, when you were one of the early employees?
So it goes back, I believe, 2005, 2006. So roughly about 17 years ago at this point. That was the company. It was primarily, I won't say primarily, arguably the premier RMM, so remote monitoring and management company, and that was the focus. So obviously we've expanded since then, but that's what we sold. So it was our RMM tool.
And when you came back a couple of years ago, I imagine it wasn't really like joining the same company, because of course Kaseya has changed enormously even in the 6 years that I've been in this world. Kaseya has changed enormously.
Absolutely. I mean, I was there for almost 10 years. I was there roughly around 9.5 years initially, and over that 9.5 year period, I mean, that was a significant change. So just to give you an idea, I interviewed in our quote unquote accounting office, which back then was a townhouse, and we had the top floor of a townhouse, and there was a folding table. We had one accountant, and that was our accounting office. So that was again 2005, 2006 timeframe. Obviously, the MSP space exploded at that point. We hit critical mass. Everybody was coming on board. So roughly by about 2010, Kaseya was a completely different company than it was in 2006 when I joined. And I think at that point, we had several hundred employees. So I left, again, I had an opportunity. This is a very small space. I try not to, again, pardon my language, piss anybody off, because you never know who you'll be working with again. So It actually turned out that a gentleman that I sold Kaseya to, 5,000 seats of VSA in 2006, ended up starting another company, and he called me up and said, hey, I've got this opportunity. Do you want to come and join me? And I wasn't looking, but opportunity and timing kind of hit, which has been my entire career. And so I left. I went to start that company, and like I said, we grew it and it did pretty well. I actually left about 3 months before Fred Vacola, who was our new CEO, joined the company. So it's entirely possible that if I stayed another 3 months, I wouldn't have left at all. Fred's absolutely amazing. I mean, what he's done with this company is just, it's incredible. But we did that, and Fred reached out to me and gave me this opportunity. And once again, I wasn't looking, but opportunity and timing, and I came back.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great story. You were saying earlier that in the US, some of the different states are bringing in their own compliance regulations. Can you see there being a situation where all 50 states have their own set of regulations, which I can imagine just being a complete nightmare? Or do you think at some point it will be dealt with on a federal level?
So it's already a complete nightmare. So to be clear, all 50 states in the United States, including Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., have breach notification or compliance laws on their books today. And I believe last year there was something like 40,000. It could be an order. It was either 4 or 40,000. I'm getting my orders of magnitude potentially wrong, but even if it's 4,000, but there were 4,000 bills that were introduced at the state and local level just around security, privacy, and compliance. So, it's not going away, and more states pass their own requirements. With that being said, the federal government is going to step in. We already have issues. So like Salesforce.com, and I know Amazon are complaining to the federal government saying, we can't try to comply with 50 different states if they have 50 different standards. And oftentimes, while there's a tremendous amount of overlap, there's also conflict. So at one point in the United States, you couldn't be, I believe it was SOX compliant, so SOX, so Sarbanes-Oxley, and GLBA, because they conflicted. But if you're in a financial industry, you had to do both. So there is something out there. Folks can look it up. It's called COPRA, Consumer Online Privacy Rights Act. It was a bill that was introduced in the Senate, I think about a year, maybe 2 years ago, and it's making its way through the House. It's making its way through the Senate. It's making its way through Congress. There is bipartisan support at the federal level to come out with a compliance standard, like a baseline compliance standard that every single company in the U.S. will have to meet. It is based off the NIST cybersecurity framework, like most of the things in the U.S. are based off of. And so at minimum, I've been encouraging and highly encouraging MSPs start delivering all of their IT services leveraging the NIST cybersecurity framework and being able to prove it with evidence just to get ahead of the curve. Because not only does it differentiate you today, where you can be an early adopter and take advantage of all the benefits and increased revenue and the stickiness and everything else of being an early adopter, but eventually, whether it's your state or the federal government passes some law, you're going to be ahead of the curve there as well.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I live in the UK, as you can tell by my voice, and it's very simple because, the UK is the size of a cookie, isn't it, compared to the US? And there are 4 countries and pretty much roughly the same laws in all the countries, certainly when it comes to important things like GDPR. Well, that was a European thing. We're not even part of Europe anymore, but we've kept GDPR, yay. And I love watching The West Wing. It's one of my favourite shows. I'm halfway through the final season 7. I don't know if you ever watched The West Wing back in the day, but what I love watching that is just how difficult it seems to be to get simple, clear laws through. And I realise that was fiction, and it's 15-year-old fiction, but I'm sure things aren't that much different in the US right now. Final thing I want to ask you, when I was searching on, I like to research my guests before they come on, and I looked you up on LinkedIn. And I'm pretty sure at the bottom of your LinkedIn profile, it said that you speak Russian. Is that correct?
So that is correct. I was actually born in Kiev, Ukraine, which obviously we know what's going on there today. My family actually escaped communism in the 70s. So I came to the U.S. when I was only about 2 years old, but my entire family left. We left with nothing. We came over to the U.S. We actually settled in Maryland, and I've pretty much been in Maryland ever since.
Wow. So we record these interviews very far in advance, and I can't remember exactly when this one is scheduled to go out, but as we speak today, it's the 24th of February, and Putin invaded Ukraine today. So that's incredible timing. I had no idea that I'd be interviewing someone who was actually born in Kiev today. But will you say something for us in Russian, Max?
Что ты хочешь, чтобы я сказал?
And is that polite enough to, bearing in mind the events that are happening today, is that polite enough to translate into English?
Absolutely. That's my standard reply, which is, what would you like me to say?
Oh, I love it. This is clearly your party trick. It clearly is.
That's right. Well, so I can still speak Russian. I understand almost all of it, but if I could say "scan long and prosper" in Russian, I'd have to really think about that. So I'll for our next interview, I'll figure out how to say that in Russian, and we'll end it with that.
Okay, that would be absolutely perfect. Thank you, Max. Thank you so much for being both on the podcast and also on this extended interview. I appreciate you being so generous with your time. And yeah, let's get you back on the podcast again next year.
Absolutely. My pleasure. If there's anything else I can do to help, I will just say, if anybody wants to connect with me, you can just type in my name, maxpruger.com, and that'll actually take you directly to my LinkedIn profile, and you can connect there. I post a lot on compliance and vulnerabilities and security and so on. And for me personally, I love the MSP space. I've been in the MSP space for 20 plus years. So if there's ever anything I can do for anyone out there, feel free to connect, reach out. I am happy to help in whatever way I can.
Paul Green's MSP Marketing Podcast.
Extended interview.